So here we are, and there it is. Why don't we start with the relic itself? Tell me what I'm looking at.
Absolutely. So what we have here is really the most significant red bearing display in all of Canada, if not the world for that matter. So these artifacts here have unrivaled provenance, dating all the way back to the red baron himself, Roy Brown, who is officially credited with shooting him down. Roy Brown was actually a member of the RCMI. So went from his hands to ours in 1920. So obviously the sort of the masterpiece of it is the cockpit chair from the Fokker triplane that the Red Baron was shot down in. So in April 1918, the Red Baron was in pursuit of an experienced Canadian pilot. And Roy Brown, who was the squadron commander of 209 of the Royal Naval Air Service, saw what was happening. And Roy Brown in particular was he was a very skilled pilot, but he was probably most famous for the fact that he never lost a single pilot in his entire squadron during his career. So he was known for when he saw an inexperienced pilot in danger, he would sort of pursue and try and help him out. So in this case, he saw the Red Baron sort of in pursuit, and he was following him behind. And he was firing on the Red Baron, and he was also being shot simultaneously by the ground, because the Red Baron was actually flying quite low to the ground in pursuit. So he was crashed down, he was killed, he was shot through the lung, and once he was down behind Australian lines, they started to strip the plane, they started taking souvenirs, and Roy Brown, obviously being credited with the ace who shot him down, was given this chair here to take home. Now, shortly thereafter, Roy Brown became sick from an illness. While he was in the hospital, his other squadron mates took this strip of fabric off the side of the Red Baron's plane and actually signed all their names to the middle there and delivered it to him while he was resting in the hospital. So, the third piece on top of it is the wingtip of the Red Baron's chair, which Roy Brown also actually gifted to Billy Bishop. And Billy Bishop, when he died in 1956, went to his son, Arthur Bishop, who gave the wingtip to the RCMI. So that was the last piece to come to the store.
And that's the wingtip of the Fokker that the Red Baron crashed.
Yes, so all three pieces belong to the exact plane that he was shot down and killed.
So I think when it landed, I mean, there was artillery fire landing in the field, and I'd read one story where the Australians actually hitched a rope around the body and actually pulled it out of the cockpit under. But the fuselage was getting beat to pieces, I guess, by shrapnel. So
it was, and there's a lot of apocryphal accounts like that, what they did with the body afterwards. It's a little unknown. What we do know is that the plane, whatever was left of it, was shipped to a depot where the British Army kept sort of all the war trophies, and that's where the items were officially dispersed from.
And a lot of it, I think, is at the Imperial War Museum in London.
There are a few pieces there.
The engine, I think.
They have what's left of it, but it's not. I don't think it's very good.
I think as Roy Brown had actually requested the engine at one point, but it was already on its way to London, and I guess
that's right.
Dibs were called on that.
Yeah, that's right. Dibs.
So you remembered, I think the name was, it was Wilfred May, Walk May, from Edmonton. Curiously, Roy Brown had family in Edmonton, and he did his last year of high school in Edmonton. I guess he was pulled into the family business, the mill, and wanted to finish up high school. Ended up going with his aunt and uncle, and became friends with this guy in his last year in high school. He was a new flyer. Wap May was brand new, green, I guess, and was given the signal. This was his first flight, wasn't it?
When the Red Baron was killed? You'd have to fact check that one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was actually his first flight.
Or at least his first in formation under command of Roy Brown.
Yeah, it was one of his first.
So the signal was stay up and above and out of it. And I guess he couldn't resist what he saw as an excellent opportunity.
Right. I think he was following his instincts. And there's one thing to note about this story that's pretty earlier in 1917, Red Baron had crashed, and it was very terrible. You know, he had some serious concussion,
Head injury, I
head
think,
injury,
right?
that's right. And the accounts are that after that time, once he returned to the front, once he got back in his plane, he was taking unnecessary risks that he had never taken before.
He broke his own rules.
Exactly. I think it might have been because of that brain damage that out of his judgment or whatever it was changed him just a
Don't
little bit.
fly low, don't fly in across lines.
Exactly, because in this case he was breaking all of his rules. He was
Yeah.
flying way too close, and that's why there is a bit
Yeah.
of a controversy of who shot him down because he was being hit by fire from the ground. He was, being driven into the ground by Roy Brown. So.
Yeah. I've read some accounts that say the preponderance of historical analysis now leans toward the likelihood that this was shot down by the Australians.
Yeah, they have sort of the ballistics, and it's funny about that story because what I like to say is that Roy Brown is still officially credited with shooting down the Roy Brown. He was also pushing him down into that position. So I think, in my personal opinion, my professional opinion, the bullet that actually killed him is immaterial. The fact that Roy Brown was pursuing him, pushing him down into that position, that he's still officially credited as having felled the Red Baron, is what matters.
I'm inclined to agree with you, not only on that basis, but it was a collaborative effort, obviously, and when you look at the trajectory of what Roy Brown experienced in the months prior to that,
Yes.
there were major health issues going on with this guy.
Yes.
You mentioned the head injury that von Richthofen sustained the year previous.
Yes.
Roy Brown, by one account, was surviving. He had such stomach problems. He lost about 25 pounds. He was under huge stress, and I read one account where it was milk and brandy was all that he consumed. Just a miserable, no hot water, week after week, this bleak, muddy existence, and
The Western Front didn't really agree with his disposition.
yeah, I don't know how well it agreed with anybody's, but he seemed to have been particularly stricken and was counseled to be grounded.
That's right. He was in and out of the hospital fairly frequently.
So the fact that he could actually lead in that context, and even having opportunity to stand down and get more breaks, he stuck it out, was just astonishing to me. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there's no question in my mind there's heroics involved in the story. Because of that.
And from what I read in the accounts of those who actually served with Roy Brown, is that the men who served with him felt that in terms of a commanding officer, he cared more about the men than anyone else they had ever served with.
Yeah.
That his first overall job was making sure everyone came back safely.
Which is what he
What he was
managed.
able to achieve. So
Yeah.
I think that, even more so than shooting down the Red Baron, is his sort of legacy.
I think he did lose. Stern Edwards was, I think, the best of the four. Of the four that left from Carleton Place, Stern Edwards was his closest friend, and I think it was Armistice Day, the last day of the war. He died in a crash, and so Roy Brown had to go back to Carleton Place and present that himself, look at that guy's parents in the eye, his friend from high school.
Imagine how difficult that would have been.
Yeah.
Well, to say as well, I mean, that was sort of the nature of the last 100 days of the First World War. The Canadians being the spearhead of the 100 Days Offensive. We sustained a higher casualty rate in that 3 months of the war than in any period before since in Canadian history. There was 45,000 Canadian casualties in that 100-day period. And, this was also brought on the Air Force. Just 1/3 of all the pilots of the RAF by the end of the war were Canadian. And half of all the bomber crews were Canadians as well. So, fortunately speaking, all the Dominions and all the British Empire, Canadians represented the largest contingent of pilots in the RAFs.
That is a jaw-dropping statistic that I doubt that many contemporary readers really understand, or at least younger readers.
When you think it's easier to think because Canada is closer, population of Britain today. They have about 60 million people. We have maybe 30, 35. But back then, Britain was still around that sort of number, like 50 million. Canada only had about 7 to 8 million people. So when you look at it from those numbers, especially, our contribution to the war was second to none in terms of population and demographics.
I know. I mean, I've been going through our own clippings. We had, I think, it was 1933 or 34 when the official designation that Roy Brown was given the formal credit for this kill, and we had a 2-page splash in the Toronto Star celebrating the question is resolved once and for all. And it's astonishing how I guess I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of our senior editors at the time in the 1930s, and I think there was probably a deepened appreciation by that time, because we had extensive coverage of the Great War in our paper, but by the 1930s, I think the understanding that this was the war that truly won us a sense of independence was more ingrained in the senior leadership of our newspaper, and so to celebrate Roy Brown's achievement and hit that credit, I think it resonated with that idea of all that blood and treasure and the price paid, but the privilege earned, if you will.
That's right. I think what spearheaded that too in the early 30s was the passing of the Statute of Westminster as well in 1931, which is largely attributed to the Dominion's actions in the First World War.
Yeah.
I mean, if you write anything about Jack Renestein, he in his writings has argued that the First World War for Canada was essentially a successful war of independence.
Yeah.
If we have one, that was certain.
Yeah. Yeah.
We really, I know you sort of get this grandiose thing, the birth of the nation and all that, but I do believe that our actions on the Western Front, accelerated our sort of place in the world as a Canadian nation, as someone who's going to handle their foreign affairs. An example that's best used is that, in the First World War, we were able to determine, our complete contribution, but when Britain went to war, we were too. In the Second World War, less than 20 years later, Canada was able to determine whether or not we were going to go to war at all. So I think that sort of freedom over our foreign policy, over our responsibility for our citizenship, came out of the First World War. So it really was very, I think, in my personal opinion, the most impactful single event in Canadian history was the First World War.
Just before you sat down, Eric and I were talking about what the correct analog is to 2018. When you think of these 18-year-olds that embraced a technology that was so new that, in this case, these 4 guys from Carleton Place actually went to the Wright brothers. And, I think in all they gave out 112 licenses. They put 112 students through their school in Dayton. And these guys got in just under the wire because Wilbur Wright had already died of typhus, I think it was. And Orville had just taken the reins of the company and was about to sell it. He was not an administrator, so it was the tail end of the school, the very end phase of it.
I got in on that. And I've the same way in terms of air technology. It's just amazing when you had the first flight in 1902, 1903 in Kitty Hawk, a couple hundred meters. To basically a decade later, you have planes that are now war machines. It's amazing sort of that such a brief period.
Well, and the Wright brothers operated in secrecy because they were so afraid somebody was going to steal their technology. They were fighting for some payoff down the road. So there was a 5-year period where there was great doubt that they were bullshitters, basically, that they hadn't achieved anything, and this was all bad rumor. They were charlatans, and it was 1908 when they actually started demonstrating publicly what they managed to do in terms of maneuvering in the air.
That's right, and part of that, I think, is that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals trying to solve this problem of flight.
Yeah.
And they were really given that first sort of credit because they had that sustained flight of a couple hundred meters. But I think that's part of the thing was what makes us special from this field of individuals who are trying to solve this problem.
Well, and the leading competitors had backing. They had support either from government or military or private enterprise. And these guys had a bicycle factory and a single engineer. But I don't know what the analog is. I can't think of a military one. I can think of somebody at age 18 now looking at blockchain technology or something that's that emergent, that maybe if you had your ear to the ground was known for a year or two or three. But
too, like
the flip side of that question, though, Mitch, is supposing that there had not been a World War I, where would aviation technology have been by 1918? Not as advanced, perhaps.
No, true, but we're talking 1915 when they went into the school, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the war was underway. There was obviously an air war of a kind already.
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make is when you speak in 2018 terms, what's the equivalent technology? We don't know. We have to have a war before we find out what the equivalent technology is.
There needs to be an imperative.
That's right. Well, things I have thought of, because obviously war sort of accelerates these technologies as a necessity. One thing I've thought about are drones, for instance. It seems a pretty big phenomenon with youth, using these drones. And this was originally, military technology. Just cryptocurrency, these sort of things.
Yeah.
Mining data from technology.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, the thing about drone technology is, I mean, I spent a lot of time with Canadian military in Afghanistan, and with very, very few exceptions, the combat soldiers I traveled with and the casualties I reported on were, people dying without an evident enemy in sight, and so, you're in a clip. The front two vehicles drive over 2,000 pounds of explosives, get bounced 60 feet in the air, and 3 people inside the lab are dead, and the rest are probably never going to walk again. And that kind of a dynamic, and the combat survivors are left with this immense frustration. Who do we fight? Who do we get back against? And to me, drone operators, it's even that much further removed, because you can actually be in Texas moving the joystick, right? And
Dehumanizes it.
Well, and the fact that these guys actually could see each other's faces in the air 1,500, 2,000 feet up, it brings home the stress of it and the reality of it in a different kind of way. It's really hard for me as a writer to try and bring that forward to a 21st century.
I hear what you're saying as well, and I think the big difference in modern warfare as well is they're not really combating a state. This isn't state-to-state warfare where you topple the administration, you sign a treaty, you sue for peace, the war ends. This is like you're fighting interstate ideologies, unseen enemies, social
non-state
media
actors.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's sort of how we have to see things in terms of 21st century technology, where you're not battling a state per se. Think about the social media element with ISIS, Al-Qaeda using Twitter, Instagram to actually recruit followers. So,
I think in a lot of cases, special forces soldiers still experience the kind of immediacy that would make hearken to what the kind of strain and stress and real experience that happened 100 years ago. The kind of ops they go on, but that's rare.
It's limited. And one thing I think is probably the best example to show the changing warfare is that. So Afghanistan was Canada's longest war in our history. We did not award one single Victoria Cross for that entire war. I just think we're not putting. The battlefield has changed to such an extent that these individuals don't have the same opportunities to sort prehistoric urbanism. We haven't had a Victoria Cross winner in Canada since 1945. And part of that is because we've put that award on such a pedestal. But the other side is that these individuals don't have the same opportunities to have these, individual acts of heroism against, an actual defined force, a defined land. It's so much more difficult. And as you said, the special forces, which are still sort of in that older style of warfare with their special operations. But that is such a rare instance in comparison.
And frankly, so secretive that the public rarely becomes aware of the heroism that.
It'll be a long time before it's declassified.
Yeah.
Just moving back to the relics for a moment, if I might.
Yes.
These arrived here at the RCMI in 1920. Have they had any adventures since then? I mean, the building was torn down and rebuilt, but
they've only left. There was one other occasion, I believe, it was in the 1990s. It's exhibited at Roy Thompson Hall for a time, but we no longer.
All three pieces.
The chair and the piece of fabric.
Yes.
But we don't send it out now, despite the requests we've had. It's too fragile. It's too valuable. The last time just the chair was appraised was in 1995, and it was valued then at $1 million.
$1 million. Wow.
So it's obviously it's only gone up since then.
Yeah.
we actually have a photograph that I'll send you of the last time that left its case, which was about 2 weeks ago. We had to open the case to photograph it for Canadian History Magazine.
Yeah.
So we have a picture of Ryan actually touching it.
It's aluminum, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And plywood, and there's still a remnants of sort of the padded cushion that actually would have covered the aluminum originally.
Remnants on
So
just the little.
just it strips up the
Right.
So that would have actually been closer to sort of a red plush fabric. Decent padding in the back. I'm not sure about the lumbar support.
I think Eric knows this about me, but one of the more distressing stories I covered in Afghanistan was I was embedded with the unit that Trevor Green was in. That he got an axe driven down the center of his head and survived and lives to this day. But the operation that immediately followed the attack after he was medevaced rounded up, of course, the hand-hewn axe, and as the 3BP CLI soldiers of our unit went through the village, they went through every mud hut, everything to round up every kind of weapon they could find. They gathered up 2 Lee Enfield rifles, and so these were all brought back to Edmonton, the axe, and so the unit itself, their unit of the they've got them. I don't know if they're on display or they're just kept in their own archive.
I think they are. So, I used to work at the military museums in Calgary.
Okay.
Which is where the PPCLI museum is housed.
Yeah.
And I know they have these artifacts, but they're not currently on display.
No, I wouldn't. I don't. Particularly the axe would be a difficult thing for that unit. They've struggled with the aftermath of that attack, and but just talk in a general sense about relics. The idea that you would bring these things home with the unit, that must go back to the earliest of human conflict, I would think.
Yeah, I would say so. Bringing sort of war trophies, souvenirs, really goes back to antiquity. There's evidence of it. So I think it's something that not only the soldiers want to remember, I think they want to have something tangible to their experience, something that they earned out of all this catastrophe. In this instance, the Red Baron obviously now probably is still the most notable figure of the First World War, but even in his own time, he was the most famous individual on either front. So the fact that, at that time, Kane and Roy Brown, whoever was collecting, bringing back war trophies, souvenirs, whatever you want to call them, sort of wanted this piece of history. And they had a sense of posterity, that they wanted to show their kids, their grandkids, this is something that they earned, this is something that they want. It's a tradition.
The tradition of a trophy goes back well into classical times. We, apart from the temporary ones of just loot hung on frameworks that would be paraded in a Roman triumph, we have two examples of sculptured monuments from the Roman Empire that are trophies of victories.
Mm. Yeah, there's something I think about taking the items of your enemy and sort of exhibiting the ultimate stamp of the triumph.
Well, the ultimate classical monument that is in that mode that is still politically sensitive to this day is the Arch of Titus in Rome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah. The when you look at these two individuals, though, everything I've read about Roy Brown says, as you pointed out earlier, his overwhelming priority was to get everybody back safe, take no casualties. But there are others who trumpeted to the ground before they even landed that they got a kill.
Yes.
And he was not among them. In fact, some of the kills he was credited with, he did not claim. It was other people in the flight who saw it and confirmed it and came forward with their own reports.
I think there is a modesty inherent in his character, and I think that's part of the reason it took so long. It was 1932, 1933 that he was finally credited with the kill. Because he wasn't, pumping his chest and walking around saying, I killed the red bear. I think it was a sense of modesty that he was doing his part. It was a sense of duty as opposed to self-aggrandizing.
Well, and it wasn't deference to uncertainty about this particular kill. It was how he behaved in the air in everything he did, which I guess made him a leader among men and an admired man in and of itself. I've read also that von Richthofen was obviously a different personality, but also not demonstrative and triumphalist about his own things.
Yeah, and that's what I've read. I mean, his character, his persona, his larger-than-life personality was really a product of the propaganda of its time. It was put forth as this great hero, of the German Empire. And that's not his doing as much as it is. They wanted sort of a face to produce the war.
The packaging of his story.
Exactly. So yeah, from what I've read as well, is that he wasn't a cocky individual either. He was confident in his abilities, but he wasn't grandstanding.
And there was not a bloodlust there, which I think is so true of Roy Brown. I think from the accounts I've read, to him he had to think of it as killing machines, not killing men.
That's right. You're knocking out other machines that are a threat to your squadron in particular.
Yeah,
that's how you have to look at it. You have to remember the air warfare. The vast majority of the First World War was basically sequestered into its own thing. This idea of combined arms, with the army using the air assets in their operations, wasn't really implemented until the last offensive of the First World War. Mm-hmm. So really, the men of the air really had sort of their own code of honor, their own war that they were fighting. So you kind of almost have to look at it independently from the rest of the war.
No, the time that I've spent with Canadian combat soldiers, they look enviously and contemptuously at airmen, describing the Gucci kit is one phrase that I've heard, and they feel like pilots get to peel resources off the top, and the dregs get thrown down the line, and you contrast that characterization with the reality that Roy Brown and his fellow flyers endured in 100 years ago on the ground.
That's right. And I think that it is right. As the rank and file often looked at the dashing airmen as if they had it so much better. But the reality was, yes, the airmen got to escape the trenches, but their rate casualty rate was much higher than the infantrymen. The average flyer was, at a certain point in 1917, their life expectancy in the air was about 3 weeks' time. 3 weeks. Yeah. So these are not guys that are lasting very long. So I think the myth of the airmen have it much better. Sure, maybe they're day-to-day conditions, but they're dying just as quickly than the infantrymen.
Yeah, and I don't know day-to-day conditions for this particular unit was any better.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say that it's good, but maybe an improvement just over living in slime.
I don't know much about it as yet. There is Roy Brown society based out of Carleton Place that Eric's kindly put me onto. That hopefully I can get a little bit more documentation from. But it's that I have seen some quotes that Roy Brown, if there was ever a sour note he sounded, it was disappointment upon return to Canada, that he was a pretty compromised human being in terms of health when he got out of that situation. He was alive, a lot of his peers weren't, but there was no pension. He felt a sense of abandonment that he'd given. I suppose you could argue that his life was cut short by this. He died at age 50 in 1944. He came back and he lived another 25 years, but diminished health, obviously, and I think at some point in those years there was a sense of disappointment that he didn't come back, that he had everyone else's back, and he felt that everyone else didn't have his back at that point, or certainly not the government.
That's accurate from what I think. I mean, the problem with service benefits after the First World War in Canada is that we actually had the best benefits in the entire British Empire on paper, but they were actually the hardest to get. So they did decline a lot of veterans their benefits at that time. And things that, ailments that Roy Brown probably wasn't even diagnosed with. Who knows, he had PTSD, other stress injuries, shell shock, what have you. These things weren't diagnosed at the time. These are individuals that really needed these service benefits. Mm-hmm. So I think it is fair to say that to a large extent, his feeling that the collective facts of Canada had been turned on him at that time, probably accurate.
Not this building, obviously, but its predecessor. So Roy Brown would have spent time here. This would have been a kind of oasis for him, I would think.
Yes,
or do we know anything about that?
So unfortunately, our records from our membership records from the 1920s aren't complete, to say the least. But he was a member of the RCMI. He was affiliated with the RCMI, and I think the importance of this institute is sort of justified by the fact that this was the place that he chose to bring these artifacts to. He could have kept them for himself, given them to the government, whatever. Yeah, he chose the RCMI. So I think that alone shows the importance of this institute to him personally.
And I guess even then there would have been War of 1812 armaments on display as there are now. There would have been a sign of a continuum of Canada's military past.
That's right.
In the building, in a living, breathing society.
That's right. The RCMI was formed in 1890 by veterans of Northwest Rebellion. So you had sort of this continuity of now, Great War veterans coming back home in 1919, 1920, with sort of this early wave. So they are now, the next chapter of Canadian history. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he saw it at that time as well. This was his contribution to his conflict.